Hey, well, welcome everybody. We are going to take maybe about a minute. If you're joining us tonight on the rebroadcast and you're kind of just wondering, how long before we are into the good stuff, you can probably jump ahead maybe a minute or two. I am going to be watching the live feed tonight so we can look for Q&A and see what you're talking about. So we're just going to make sure that it's working, that it's live. If you found it, you can relax, you can know you're good to go. And as soon as we see everything is good, now I see Oxford Church of the Nazarene is live with Christmas Eve service. So I think that's this. It is. And we are titled wrong, but you know what? We'll figure that out. And let me see if I can see the comments. And if you're on and the link is live, you know that you're good to go. And I'm not seeing comments just yet. But, oh, and I lost it. Look at that. Okay. Just give me a second, guys. I want to make sure I can see your comments. So when we get to our Q&A, we're good to go. And like I say, everybody watching this on the rebroadcast, you can just skip ahead a minute until we're ready to start. We wanted to take this first minute or two to make sure that we are good to go. Now, you know what I might do? I might pass this out. See if you can get that all working for me. And if you can pull it right up and the comments are good, I'll take it back. Just a minute. Well, I will say that this Zoom business and getting online and making it work, technology is lots of fun. But how about we begin? I just want to welcome you all here tonight. I'm Pastor Jody Getson. I am the pastor here of Oxnaz Online and your hostess with the mostest for tonight. Now, I will say this. A lot of people have been asking me, what is this all about? What are we signing on for? And well, it's this. Let me just explain. We are an online church. We are in 2021 figuring out what it means to be a church online. But this is not what you might think of. We are here doing this tonight to serve. Now, we've done maybe 4, 5, 6, maybe community learning events. It's because part of our passion, part of our mission is to help us learn how to love each other. This is a session we put together because we know that people struggle with the effects of childhood trauma. My friend Janine, I'm going to introduce you here in just 2 seconds. Man, her story and what she's doing to help, this is something that we just wanted to give to you as a gift to help you on the journey. So that's why we're doing it. It's just to help us love each other. No one's going to be preaching unless Janine, I don't know, something happens. That's not what tonight's about. We're going to look at the effects of childhood trauma. We're going to understand what it means to be trauma informed. And the big thing, guys, is we're going to look at the fact that healing is possible. We're going to hear that and hopefully understand that more through Janine's story. So that's what's going to happen. I'm about to introduce her, but let me remind you one more time that there is going to be a Q&A. I know you guys are going to have questions for her. So throw them down in the comments. We're going to take some time to listen to her for a bit. And then as we go to wrap later this evening, we will come back and try to hit some of your questions. So without further ado, and with all the tech hopefully working in place, let me introduce to you I guess I'm going to say Dr. Janine McConaughey. So Janine is my friend, but I'm going to tell you this woman, she is an international trauma-informed author and advocate. She's lived with the effects with trauma since sexual abuse since she was 3 years old. And it wasn't until she entered therapy and began a healing journey at the age of 61 that she just really found that healing was possible. And so what did she do about it? She wrote 3 books. I mean, what else do you do, right? So we're going to talk about her journey. We're going to see what she's done. And there's more. There's more. Before we get to her, I have to tell you more. Besides authoring, she sits on the board for Attachment and Trauma Network. And she's bringing to us 40 years of teaching, teacher education, and early childhood development. She's going to help us understand a lot about trauma tonight. But what you're going to see, guys, what you're really going to see and hear is her heart. She wants to encourage other survivors of childhood trauma. So, Janine, welcome. We are so happy to have you here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to do this. I told all my friends I'm speaking in Canada today from my home, but I'm speaking and I'm so excited to be here. And I appreciate, of course, I always appreciate being able to talk, but especially with you, Jody. I'm so excited about this. So thank you for inviting
Awesome.
me.
Awesome. And I just want to say, we have so many things we're going to talk about tonight, but let's just let people hear a little bit of your story. Just kind of dive into what you've experienced and how it's kind of brought us here today.
So, first of all, I want to say you had technology problems, and my family forgot that I was doing this, and they're having a party in the hall.
Oh,
And
nice.
so,
You never know what you're going to get right. We're just like, we're free
so
fall.
if anybody saw me reaching for my phone, I was like, quiet. So anyway, it's the world we live in, and doing everything on Zoom. We just have to accept the fact that things are going to happen, funny things. We'll have a million bloopers by the time we're done with all this.
Oh, for sure.
So my story was I was completing my 40th year as an educator. I was teaching in a college, and I was a teacher educator, and I felt led to go to therapy, and it was one of those serendipitous kind of situations where I felt led to a particular therapist. So that in 2014, I walked into therapy at the age of 61.
Wow.
And what unfolded as a result of that, when I walked in, I was just like, I don't know. I don't know whether I should sign my contract next year. And so a lot of times when you go to therapy, you think that it's about one thing. And and maybe there's some stuff deeper, but it gets you there, and that's okay, whatever reason that you begin. So I learned slowly after I fell completely down a rabbit hole and realized that yes, I was a survivor of sexual abuse, and that I had repressed so much of my own story and told this cover story about my life, that which I could, because my father was a pastor, my mother was a teacher. I grew up in churches, and really no one could have known my entire life that my story was not this idyllic story that I told. So but what I learned was that I had lived my entire life with the coping strategies of a very small child, and I was a remarkable child. I was an intelligent child. I was a precocious child. I was an adorable child, and so all of those things worked to my advantage to be able to do what I did. But they were not serving me any longer, and I knew that the inner turmoil that had been with me my entire life, that it was starting to surface, and that I wasn't able to contain it anymore. So after 3 years of intensive therapy, and the main therapy that was used was EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and I'll probably talk more about that later, but it is a trauma-informed therapy that is well researched, and there are many more therapies that are beginning to be understood, but that was the one that was the main one. And one day when I was sitting on the couch, it was a really hard day. It was a terrible day. It was a difficult day. And I had processed a huge thing, and I was crying. And I said, if I can get off of this couch and help even one person, today will be worth it.
Aww.
And so I really feel like that God heard that request and has just blessed me beyond all measure. So when I was asked to speak in Nova Scotia, I'm like, okay, yeah, that's part of that. That's part of that I got off the couch to do. So so that's my mission, is to help other people heal, and especially before they're 61. That's a really bad idea.
Yeah, you waited a long time. And Janine, I'm interested, before we kind of go to the next one, you waited a lot of time, and you, like you said, you kind of put on a good front. Do you think like you knew deep down you were really pushing everything? Or do you think like you just didn't even realize you just thought that's all life was.
I think that I always lived at two levels. And so the outer me that was very successful and very educated, and I've been married 41 years. I have two amazing adult children, and so all of those pieces in my life um, were all in place. It was the perfect story that I built. Did I know that underneath, and did the dark cloud consume me on days? Yes. And I didn't know what that was, and I didn't know why it was. And honestly, a lot of times I felt like it was a spiritual problem. I was on antidepressants for years because of depression, but it wasn't really depression, it was actually the effects. So yes, I knew there was something. I call it the knowing unknowing of trauma.
Yeah.
You know,
It's
you're holding
interesting.
it together, but you kind of know.
Yeah, because I'm sure
Yeah.
there's lots of people listening out there that, we might have this stereotype of what a traumatized person looks like, and that, and we just kind of get this, it's way far to one side. But really, it can be in the faces of any of us and all ages, and trying to put on a good face, trying to do what we need to do. But then you got to that point, and like you say, in your 60s, and you said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go and start a journey that was super tough, but well, we're going to talk more about it. How about we jump into this?
Yes.
Now, we use the word trauma a lot. We're even saying, what it means to be trauma informed. Could you help us define trauma, and then maybe into like what it means to be trauma informed and live that way?
So my definition of trauma, which is partially out of the DSM, my family is having a party out there. They absolutely do not
We
remember
can't
what
hear
I'm
it.
doing.
We're good.
So I'm glad no one else can hear. It's so distracting. Okay, so a traumatic event is anything that causes you to fear for your life. Okay, so we have to remember that that is a very subjective experience.
Right.
So you take a child that's 3 years old, a spider in the bedroom could make them fear for their life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so depending on the age, depending on prior experiences, depending on, and then there's, of course, there are things that absolutely no one would quit. Yes, you did fear for your life, but sometimes people put trauma in categories, and they say, well, especially I'm really sad when people read my book and they say, well, I didn't have anything like what happened to you. And I'm like, no, that trauma is trauma. It's trauma to you. It's important to you. It doesn't, we can't compare. It's ineffective to compare. So a traumatic event is one thing. And if you receive the proper care, like after an accident, if you receive proper care and everything, that you can recover from that in healthy ways. But trauma are those things that you never are completely heal from, and it builds internalized messages, and it builds that all sorts of layers on top of it, because you don't get the proper healing from it. So trauma, in one person, something could happen and it would be but they would heal. And so a lot of people say, well, that happened to me and I was okay. Well, that's because you had all sorts of supports in your life and things that help that. So let's take what happens in the brain, and that is the really indicator of trauma, is that that it triggers the amygdala. Okay, so I'm going to use Dan Siegel, the brain model. Okay, so here's your thumb. This is your amygdala, and it is wrapped up in the prefrontal cortex, and this is your brain stem. And so this is your upper brain up here, and your outer brain, and where all the cognitive stuff takes place. And this is the amygdala, and this is in the limbic brain, and that's where all of your emotions and your the amygdala watches and decides what's important, what's scary. And then the brainstem are your very primitive fight, flight, freeze. That's where that originates. So what happens is you're walking down the street and you see what you you think is a snake, okay, you jump, okay, and your lid flips because all of your cognitive stuff goes online because you are down here in the brainstem and you're just reacting. Your amygdala has said danger. Okay, then you realize, oh, it's a coiled rope. And then your brain, your brain has come back online and you realize. And so, but there's traumas that happen one incident, then there's traumas that happen chronically, and then it also depends on the age that it happens. So, so because my trauma began at 3, it began before I had even developed a sense of self, and so it causes problems in the development of the child. And really, what we want to say is it's developmental trauma, and that eventually will be the term for it. So, so being trauma informed is kind of what I just did. Okay. It is learning about how trauma affects the brain, what the long-term results are, and it is viewing behavior differently because of what you know. So, for instance, there were so many layers that I had built on top of my trauma to protect myself. And hypervigilance was one of those. I felt like I had a camera that just snapped pictures, everything. I mean, everybody knew if they lost something, they just go ask mom. She knows where it is because I was just constantly scanning the environment. I was really good. I was on a lot of accreditation teams for preschools. I could pick up on everything in the room. I knew. I saw this, I saw this. So that's that hypervigilance that comes out of that. And so so it's understanding. And so I began to have self-compassion for myself and realized how tightly I was wired. Just so tight, and help myself learn to relax. I also learned that I was in trauma loops a lot. It was kind of like I was repeating. I would get myself into situations that were not safe situations, and where I should have been able to get myself out of them, but I wasn't able to because of the trauma. And so it helps you to view behavior differently. It helps you to understand addictions differently. It helps you to understand people who with anxiety, with all of these things, that this is really a natural reaction to what happens to us. So that's being trauma informed. I consider being trauma informed having compassion.
Having compassion
and understand.
You might not understand what's causing behaviors, and it doesn't mean too, I'm sure, that we see a negative behavior and assume someone's responding from trauma, but that we try to have compassion, recognizing there's things that we don't understand, that sometimes make people do things that maybe they don't enjoy doing or feeling.
Right. And I think that, it's really in the trauma informed world, we kind of say, once you see trauma, you begin to see trauma everywhere, which is good and bad. Right?
Yeah, I was going to say,
like I bought a new car.
Is that bad or good?
I bought a new car. It was red, and then all of a sudden I'm like, wow, I didn't know there were so many red cars in the world. Wow. Right? Because you start to see things, and so you have to be cautious. But if a reaction seems like, whoa, why, what happened right there, then maybe, okay, so I think we have to think about that. Not every trauma, I don't even know, I could probably spend the whole hour talking about what trauma is. I mean, there can be trauma before birth. There can be birth trauma. There can be trauma in the home. There can be trauma through abuse. There's just so many ways that the trauma, it's not so much that it's how it's dealt with. So if a child is frightened, like I was, and screaming, and not to punish the child, but to try to figure out, oh my gosh, what, I wonder why. I wonder why this is going on. Why are they reacting this way? And so, and you know, historically, we kind of have this attitude, well, they're just being, and my parents both said, well, you were difficult because they didn't understand, you know. So I think I've taken us far astray, but
It's all good. It's all a conversation. It's learning. And I really liked when you talked about the amygdala and the fight or flight. I've experienced that, and some of what I've experienced, I recognize wasn't my thinking brain. It wasn't the problem that I thought it was, but it was responding to something that, like many others, I sort of pushed down in order to live life and move forward. But sometimes it's these responses and these things that aren't maybe what they should be that give you a hint it's time. Well, let's sorry, go ahead.
I want to think for clues.
Yeah, that's the word, clues. Yeah.
It's a clue,
Clues.
yes. To look underneath it, to look underneath the behavior and
Go
see.
deeper. Why is it happening? Now, what about your book, I think, or one of them, if I remember right, says, you know, healing from the effects of childhood trauma. So we understand trauma could come in a million forms, and becoming informed is like part of what we're doing and understanding. But what are the effects, or what are some that you experienced or that we should understand are the effects from childhood trauma that carry through?
I think that I want to talk about the ACEs study for a second.
Oh, good.
The ACEs study, when sometimes you hear people say, oh, I have, my ACE score is, and mine is 5, and you know, and there's a scale from 1 to 10. But where that all originated was that the research team, it was a collaborative research study with the CDC. And what they were trying to figure out, Kaiser Permanente got involved with it, with the CDC, and what they were trying to figure out if there were medical ramifications from adverse childhood experiences. Oh. And so what they did was they had a scale, there's 10 items, and you can go to ACEs too high, and you can actually take that. And it's right there.
I did that.
And
yeah.
Did you? Yeah. And it deals with things that happen in the home, things that, you know, abuse. It deals with if you had a parent who was an alcoholic or abusive, and you know, so it has a variety, and it asks you, did any of this happen to you before the age of 18? Right. And so then you get a score. So what they did was they took all these employees who participated in the study at Kaiser Permanente, and they compared it with their medical records. And what they found was there was a dose response. So the higher the ACE score, the more likely there were to be these ramifications. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there were such things as physically as diabetes, cancer, heart issues, obesity. Actually, obesity was one of the original things that set them on this. And so there were physical effects. There were also there were risky behaviors. Yes. Okay, so that category of risky behavior. So there was promiscuity that increased. There was, in fact, the chance of smoking was another one. Alcohol was another one. Drug abuse. So if I were doing my so when I do my webinars, I show all these different charts, and I say here's an ACE score of 1, and it goes this high. Here's an ACE score of 2, and the chance of you getting diabetes goes here. The chance of with 3, 4, or 5, and 4 or 5 is kind of a breaking point where then it just really increases at that point. And so in my work that I do, and in my advocacy work that I do, it is not uncommon for me to meet someone with an ACE score of 10. And we know that we didn't even calculate everything that. And another thing is that we only said, did it happen to you one time? So it doesn't even address the fact that I had multiple incidences of sexual abuse from 3 to 6. Address that. It just says, did it happen to you once?
Wow. And
And so,
can I just pause there for 1 second? I think this, I will say that I took a webinar from you. This is how we met, just for everyone to know, on doing trauma-informed ministry. And I will say I probably felt like maybe many people listening tonight, I didn't really know if I was trauma-informed. But when I looked at that ACEs study, and when I saw in black and white in those charts that the more and more negative experiences, traumatic experiences that you had as a child, that it just was like a graph that just went straight up. Your chances of every, things that we may be judging as, negative behaviors, your chance went up and up and up. And I don't think I've ever had a moment where I was so grasped with the need to be compassionate, because we might look at that person that's struggling, with this behavior or that behavior, and just place the judgment like, I don't do that, and I'm not, I can say no or whatnot. But that's what I really think. That's why I wanted to just pause there for a second, because
yes.
that's what I really see becoming trauma informed is about, and why it's about loving people and just having compassion, because that person may, like you said, have physical abuse, sexual abuse, mental abuse, neglect, live through divorce, live through all the 10 things possibly that are on that ACEs scale. And that just really stacks things against people's ability to succeed or feel that they can. And if we could understand that, I just feel like it would go such a long way
It was
for us.
so far in having compassion and knowing how to help people.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to fix behavior. I mean, a lot of what I do is
good.
with trauma
Yeah.
sensitive schools. And you're trying to fix the behavior and stop the behavior and control the behavior, when in actuality, what you need to do is to heal the hurt, and then the behavior will take care of itself.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. We need to land on that one more time. We need to look, you said earlier, kind of look below the surface. Why am I reacting this way with children? Look below, and the healing needs to come, not just us looking at behaviors. We can be very judgy about behaviors, and
very, very
yeah.
judgy. I do want to say that also, if you go to ACEs Too High, there's the ACEs survey that you can take, and that if you keep scrolling down, there's a positive childhood experiences that you can take.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a little bit more nuanced, like from 1 to 5, you say, did I have friends that I hung out with in high school? Did I have one adult, 1 or 2 adults who were all in the game for me and cared about me? Did I have, and in my work in the church, I'm just like that. The reason that I was able to be as successful as I was, despite the amount of abuse that occurred in my life, was really the support that I received as a child and teenager as part of the church community. So, and it can be church community, it can be school community, it can be any kind of organization, it can be your neighbor that takes an interest in you. But it's those positive childhood experiences that and so sometimes people who have the positive experiences, they might get a little bit judgy about someone who didn't come out as well as they did. That would have been me, right? Well, I had bad stuff happen.
No, you didn't. And and you taught me too, Janine, in earlier conversation we've had, you can't compare traumas, and we don't stack up. I got through this and I behave this way. These are all ways that we can grow and understand each other, be more compassionate. And we could talk probably for hours to try to wrap our heads around. I do encourage everyone, if you want to understand a little bit more, look up that ACEs study. If you can't find it, maybe we'll throw a link to it in the comments, because it really, I'm going to tell you, it was so powerful for me. It was Janine that got me on to looking into it and understanding, and just being open to look further down, try to understand. These things are so critical. But I want us to get to the healing, and I want to remind everybody.
Okay. Before you go on, because I just redid my whole website, and it's janine.org. but I have a guide, trauma informed guide, and it has 5 steps to becoming trauma informed. And you just go to the
Awesome.
page, it'll take you to the books, it'll take you to the videos, it'll take you to, the 5. And there's
Awesome.
just, I mean, there's way more steps, but I did that for people who are just getting started. If you'll do what's on that page,
Awesome.
by the end of it, and it's a paradigm shift, is what it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a paradigm shift. That's what really trauma informed is. It's a paradigm shift.
I love it.
Go ahead.
I love it. Oh, that's good stuff. And I do hope everyone goes to Janine.org. We'll give you that link. Make sure you can check that out. But don't forget, everyone listening, you're on the live. You are the lucky ones who get to type in some questions. So I've got my iPad here. I'm going to ask her a question. I'm going to keep my eye out. But we're going to start moving towards healing. We could spend, is it spelled ACES is what we're saying. ACES is the study.
Yes.
And we'll, like I say, make sure you have that link. But I'm going to be checking. We're going to start to talk about healing. We're going to understand. I'm going to ask Janine to launch into how could she be 61, have suppressed and hidden and start therapy, and all of a sudden be so transformed that she's writing books and helping people. What's possible for healing? Is it real for you out there that are thinking, I know that the cloud she talked about that kind of gets hidden behind my happy life and big smile. You wonder if I open that can of worms, Pandora's box, what's going to happen? She's going to talk about her healing journey. Throw down some questions. We'll talk healing, and then we'll get into a time of Q&A. So Janine, move us from some of the what's and effects to really what's possible for people.
So I want to say that for most who've experienced, if the trauma is sexual abuse, usually in your 40s, that's when you start to feel the effects of it. And I did. And I went on medication because of it, and that helped me to raise my family. And I don't condemn medication, but medication does not heal it. Okay, it masks it, but it also kind of puts a dimmer switch on the joy that you could have. You kind of live in this kind of flat place in life, and you're not really experiencing the abundant life from the Christian standpoint. So I think it's important the earlier, and I wouldn't have had so many layers if I had accessed healing earlier than I did. So, but what is healing? And I think that, and I want to talk. One thing I haven't really talked about is attachment. So I want to talk about that just for a minute. So part of that, what I was saying, if you have the nurturing atmosphere, you had a trauma happen, but you have nurturing people, and you have a specific caregiver mother who is extremely nurturing to you and helps you through that process, and you're attached to that person. That's what that one caring adult is. Then the ramifications of trauma will be less. And so part of my healing journey, my mother, I believe, had also experienced trauma. It was generational. She wasn't able to attach to me, and therefore she wasn't able to help me after the abuse. And so my dad was my hero. But it's really odd. There's my whole generation, they put mothers to sleep while they had babies. And so my mother, I was in the nursery for 5 days. I didn't even see my mother for like 5 daes after I was born. And so a lot of that attachment process was, and I talk about that in some of my books. So attachment, and that's why I'm on the Attachment and Trauma Network board of directors, because attachment and trauma go together. And so when I talk about healing, which is where I am, I need to say it's not just the trauma, but if there are attachment, which usually the effects of trauma, they usually go hand in hand. Not always, okay? So, but both of those have to be healed. Okay, so, and because of that, the way that humans were created was for relationships. And so when that's really good, that's how we survive, that's how we thrive, it's relationships. It also is very bad if your trauma involves relationships. So trauma that is at the hands of those that you should be able to attach to and trust is the most, in my mind, is the absolute most damaging. So when I talk about healing, let's say you have trauma from a car accident, and it is totally affecting your life, and you need help, but it's not going to be the long, extended, deep healing that was required when I went to therapy. So I always try to say that at the beginning, because I don't want, man, I can't go into 3 years of intensive therapy.
It's not 3 years for everyone. There's no one
Right.
one path,
Yes.
right?
Yes. It's one of my friends says one size fits one.
Yeah,
I just
good
love
one.
that, right? And so that's really the truth of it. So it depends on the healing process, depends on the degree to which the trauma happened, the how often, the effects of it, the attachment, and it also depends. Okay, so one thing that I didn't really talk about when I talked about trauma is because we call these things mental illness, we think it's in our head.
Oh, that's
Okay?
a good point. Yeah.
Trauma is not just it's in the body. You're in Western society, we've taken our head. I said one day in therapy, the only purpose for my body is to carry my head around. And I really, really believe that. My therapist was like, oh, we have some work to do. Because I was so disengaged from my body. But if you think about when you're sad, you're not sad in your head. You're sad in your body.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about being frightened, it's really, I mean, you really, if you're frightened, your cognitive brain has gone off somewhere, and you're feeling it in your body.
In your body.
And so yes. And so that's where trauma settles. And sometimes it settles in the exact, for instance, one of my traumatic experiences when I was a young adult, involved me going off the edge of a cliff and hanging on to branches. And so the trauma settled itself in my hands. And so my hands have hurt my whole entire life. I didn't understand it. If I get stressed, my hands swell up. It's in my hands. So I've had massage therapy and done different things to try to help that. But even when I went to get my nails done, they were like, we don't really like to do your nails because you hold your hands so tight. And so the trauma was in my hands. And that's true a lot of times, that it's in a part of your body. It settles in your body somewhere. So when we talk about healing, we have to talk about, do we want to talk about, we don't want to just talk about, I'm going to say this correctly. We don't want to just talk about that we're going to go get our brain fixed. Okay. When you saw in my seminar, I have all webinars, and she's holding her brain in her hand and she's like holding it out. That's kind of how we go into therapy, is we think that, it'd be great if we could take our brain to therapy and drop it off and pick it up in a couple of weeks, right? Not gonna happen. And so if we think about it just being in our brain, then we're not going to get the full effect of the kinds of therapy that we need to be able to heal. And so my healing journey, what all did that involve? It was physical, and EMDR helps to get that. Actually, shame is a terrible, okay. When you're guilty about something, then you feel badly that you did that thing. When you feel shame, you feel like you're a horrible person and you're unworthy of anyone ever caring about you.
Shame is about identity, where guilt is about action. Shame is I think one of the most crushing things in people's lives, and I'm sure so tightly tied to trauma and our reflection of
trauma.
Yes, of course.
Yes. And all children believe they were responsible for their
Absolutely.
abuse. just not, because they're egocentric and there's no other way for them to think. So in EMDR, the shame actually poured off of me as heat.
Wow.
It was physical,
Wow.
and it comes off as energy. It just comes out of your body as heat because of the energy. Kind of an interesting thing that happens. So you have to think about, and there's so many things that physically you can do to help yourself heal. So then you are, and you do have to change the way that you think about things. Okay. So, like I had to realize that I believed that I brought my abuse on myself because I was needy, because I didn't have an attachment relationship with my mother. So I was looking for attention, which is a basic human need.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't anything wrong with me needing attention, but I was punished for looking for attention. Probably, and when I later understood that, out of trying to keep me from being abused again.
Wow.
And so I had to rewire all of that, because as an adult, I was constantly diminishing myself because I was trying not to bring attention to myself. So everything that I've done in the past 3 years is because I no longer feel the shame of trying to get attention.
Wow. So you think that's would you say, Janine, that a first step in someone's kind of healing journey is to let go of their own blame and release the shame, and so all the other stuff can happen? Is that kind of how you
that's
see?
really, wow. I mean, sometimes you have to, there is no direct,
right.
there is no direct line that I can say, this is the path you're going to take to healing.
Right.
Because sometimes you're going to heal from a car accident first. Yeah. It just doesn't have anything to do with your child abuse, but you've got to take care of that first. And if you trust the process, your body and your mind, they know the order that it needs to happen in. Mm-hmm. And so, but I think the most important thing is not to go to therapy and think that you're going to be done in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I remember looking at my therapist and thinking, I said, do you have a magic wand? Because this would be so much easier if you had a magic wand. This would be so much easier. But, she smiled at me and she said, no, because the healing comes from within you. Mm-hmm. I said, I'm here to support you and guide you, but the healing. So I have a chapter, and I was going to show my book earlier. This is Brave. And this is really the story of my healing journey. And awesome. So this is the story of my therapist and I, and the work that we did for me to heal. And I try to put a lot in there. I'm really super, super vulnerable.
You
and
are. I just, good on you.
I say it right out there, because there were so many things I had to discover on my own. And if I can help somebody not to have to reinvent that wheel, then I'm going to put it in here and I'm going to say it.
That's awesome.
So, because I think that I can, if I had read Brave before I had gone to therapy, I probably would have saved myself months of therapy because I just had to start from scratch. I didn't know anything. And so, but there's a chapter in here where I kind of talk about the process and talk about that, you kind of circle around. Like I processed the 3-year-old abuse from the very beginning and to the very end. And mm-hmm. I would just have to go around and do another layer, and I would realize another aspect of it, and we would process through that. And so that could be discouraging, I just did this a month ago, and here I am, and I'm all falling apart because of the same. And no, it's not the same. It's a different layer of the same thing.
Right.
So, but most of all, if I could heal at 61, then healing is possible.
Yep.
It is absolutely possible. So what does healing look like when you get there? I'm starting to ask myself the question. So, what does healing look like when you get there? It does not look like nothing ever happened to you. You can't erase the story that is yours.
Okay.
And you really don't necessarily want to, because I am the compassionate, because of my healing, I was able to redeem what happened and be compassionate. And there's hardly anyone who tells me their story that I'm like, oh, I've been there. Oh, I totally get this. I totally, And so I'm very empathetic because of it. But so we are who we are because of our stories. But I always want to say that God never wanted anything like that to happen. God, and this is what I always have to say, that God did not intend for me to be abused. He did not want it. He did not allow it. He did not cause it to happen. He cried over me as a little girl, and worked to help me, and brought me the most amazing therapist to help me heal. And so I think that what I have now, what healed is to me, like today, I got somebody did something today on Facebook. I was like, I felt it. Boom. My lid flipped. My amygdala was looking for danger. I was like, flight, what do I do? And I was like, but I recognized it.
Yeah.
Right. That's trauma informed. Okay. I recognized it. I was like, okay, I just felt my lid flip. I felt all of the adrenaline and cortisol. I felt all that flood my body. I felt the shame reaction creep up inside of me again, because I was told I was inappropriate. Why would somebody say that to somebody?
I mean, look at me. No.
I don't know. Okay. So, because I had talked about my book in a forum. Okay, whatever. Okay, so I need to explain that, why they said that, because I'm really not very inappropriate very often. Okay, so anyway, but I felt all of that reaction, right? So then does that mean I'm not healed? No, because I was like, all right, we saw what happened. We know what happened. We're going to breathe deeply. We're going to take a bunch of because what you do is when you breathe in deeply and breathe out slowly, you calm down your parasympathetic nervous system. You get your vagus nerve. There's really cool stuff to learn. And you can get yourself calmed down. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to listen to some music, and I'm going to go work on a puzzle. And before healing, I would have just kept ramping myself up.
Oh, that's helpful. That's really helpful, because you hit on a couple of things there. It doesn't mean that your past is erased, and it doesn't mean that you don't experience things again, but you can experience them differently and still live abundantly and be equipped and informed to kind of live through them. I would say I connect with that too. And as I listen to you, I've learned a lot of things. Like, I've learned not to compare traumas in some of our conversations, and I've learned not to maybe be so quick to assess other people's actions because I don't understand what caused them. There's a lot there. But you mentioned a couple things that I just really think are worth bringing out just one more time quickly before we go to the questions. You said, like, it's in our body. And I know a lot of people suffer with anxiety, as I have very openly, like Janine has shared her journey with trauma, and I've kind of been very open about my journey with anxiety, and I didn't understand until later. And some of the finding things out and understanding, it's freeing, because you're learning. And the shakes that would come, and maybe if you have anxiety, you've experienced the tremors in the body, and I didn't understand that was my body and my inside, fight and flight brain all trying to tell me something's wrong. I didn't know how to listen to them. I just fought them because I don't like what they do to make me feel. And so understanding that the shaking and the body and those kinds of things that we experience with anxiety are trying to get out and deal with, and my brain fighting, it's because it thinks something that maybe I need to deal with. So I want to encourage everyone. I love that Janine is vulnerable and open to say that she started therapy at 61. And some people talk, well, I don't need therapy. I feel like everyone needs therapy. I don't think there's anyone. I don't think there's anyone who in their life has not experienced trauma. And she said another thing. She talked about negative scripts and shame. When we experience trauma as a child, things that are traumatic to us, even if they're not life or death, we can start a script, a line in our head. And it doesn't matter who you are or how together you look. You can still feel that thing that she talked about, like it's my fault. I experienced a trauma as a teenager. And when I'm working through therapy to unpack it and to really find healing and understand how it impacts me as an adult in my 40s, like she already talked about, I saw that my response was always to blame myself, to be mad at myself that I couldn't just hold it together. So I hope that, I know there's a lot to cover and we're going lots of places, but I hope little tidbits like that encourage you to understand your body, listen to your body. Don't accept that shame, like dig deeper. These are really, really great things. I mean, we could never get, our hands around everything, but if we learn a little bit and if we become a little bit more loving, it's super helpful. Janine, I have a couple of questions, and I'm hoping that people kind of will put a few more in. But one mom asked about talk therapy, and she said, if talk therapy isn't working, do you have any other ideas or any other thoughts? Not everybody just wants to go and talk.
Yeah, and actually, a lot of times just talking about your trauma again and again you're doing that all here. You're doing that it's your cognitive. True. And it's not even reaching what's in your body, right?
Okay.
And so when trauma is in the body, talk therapy has CBT has its place because it does help you to change your thinking patterns. But if you try to change your thinking patterns without changing the emotions that are underneath them, then a lot of times you just keep repeating. You can't, and everybody knows that. Like, I decided I'm not going to eat sugar this week. Well, a day later, right? I'm human, and sugar is really addictive. And if I get under stress, I'm probably going to go for it. But the problem is right there, right? Like that I was stressed. There's something that bothered me that makes me think. I did a conference last week, and every time I get done introducing and moderating for a session, I'd be in the kitchen. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so connected. This eating is so connected to my stress level. So I think that changing, and I did a whole positive thinking thing before I went to therapy. I was determined to change my thoughts and be positive. And then I went to therapy, and that obviously it hadn't worked. And so so I think that at my website, I have Finding a Therapist, and I talk about what to look for in a therapist. I talk about the different kinds of therapy. There's so much more than I can't even go into right now, but there are so many resources that I have at my website to kind of help you. And you can always email me and I'll help you.
She is great to answer emails, and she did that for me, and look where it got us.
Best email I ever answered. Yes. By the way, can I just say, because I sat here so that star would be behind my head, and then when I was talking about healing, I forgot to mention it. That star symbolizes the people who have read Brave or listened to me speak and have sought help. Awesome. And so I have people all over the world that are like, you know what, I need to go to therapy. Mm-hmm. I realized you've helped me understand that it would help me. And so that's what my star symbolizes. And I just look at it every day because I realize that my willingness to heal changed generations in my family. Awesome. And it's changing. So that's what my star. So I have a star over my head for a reason. Okay, next question.
And I love that your book is brave, because I think for everybody to recognize that if they talk to somebody and take action, you have to be brave to do it. But I'm so glad that the stigma is going away. I really feel like you don't
Yes.
need to feel stigmatized anymore. I love this question. One person listening kind of said, if your life is going good and and you're functional, but you know that you're aware that there is childhood trauma, like, is there any benefit to digging it up if you're doing well? Like, do you want to really go? What do you think?
It's such a good question.
I
I
thought
love
so
that.
too.
I want to tell you that when I went to therapy, I it was, I mean, I'm a faith person, and there was a God prompt, I mean, God could see my future better than I could, probably, that I was really coming apart. But I had lost 100 pounds. I was at the top of my career. There was so much that was so good in my life. It was really probably the best time in my life. But it was my, how do we say this? We say, without healing, trauma will always surface at some point,
I think
and
so.
maybe it's going to be when you're old, and and you're angry at your children, and you're not a pleasant person to be around, right? Maybe that's when it comes, right? But trauma, if you know that there is childhood trauma, it is always going to, my third book, which, let me just say this right now, my third book is my adult life on trauma. And so to myself and everyone else, most of the time I felt like I was great. And I really go into all of the things that I didn't even realize were affecting me. I didn't even know. So yes, it has value. And actually to go and get help before, one of the things that therapists tell me is they get so discouraged because people tend to wait too long to go to therapy, and they're in distress, and it's so much harder to heal when you start from that place, than if you start from a place of, I think I'm okay, but I know I have this in my past. So yes, please, yes.
And
So
I think somebody had asked a question too about, how do we know kind of when we've dealt with it? And I think you kind of touched on that a little bit. It doesn't mean that it's forgotten, like you said. It doesn't mean that you're never going to get a trigger response again. I know that there's many people kind of that are listening, and so I think we're all kind of going back through, like, what happened to me? What's the ACEs test all about? What are my scores, and how did it affect me? But I think it's part of the journey. And for me, I would say if I've learned one thing about dealing with anxiety and finding out, that something was kind of repressed that happened in my life, I think I fought, and you and I have talked about the visual, and it's kind of tied to anxiety, but I think it applies. It's like the wave was coming, and I fought it. I wanted to be okay. I want to be strong. I mean, look at me. I'm a pastor. I love the Lord. I have joy. So this ain't gonna beat me. I can't be taken down. And if I can, it's my fault. I've got to be better. I've got to be stronger. But I think learning to just love ourselves more, to not feel shame, to get help when we need it, and to look at the crazy things that we do and say, where did that come from? Or the crazy stuff we tell ourselves, and say, where did that come from? That if we are open, we can grow. And if we're open, we can also be more compassionate. I like the story, Janine, that you told me about. I don't remember you said how old, but you were a professional in the top of your career, and you went to leave an office room one day, and a man put his hand, do you remember?
Yeah.
Across the door. And here you are, a fully put together, normal, regular woman. And well, you can tell us that, like, you freaked out.
So I something was said in the meeting, and I felt the flight response that I had to get out of there. And I was told, no, we need to stay here and finish discussing this. And I said, no, I really think I need to leave. And when I tried to get up and leave, the person who was in charge of the meeting just put their hand on the door and said, no, I
Let's
want
just
you to
wait, yeah.
stay. Right. Well, what I did was I had a complete PTSD flashback to being closed up in a room with 3 boys, and did not turn out well for me. And so I was no longer an adult in that room.
Yeah.
I was 12 years old, and I know that I looked irrational and like, what on earth, right? Because I just had to get out of that room. And so so a lot of time, and when it was over, I didn't remember that because I didn't even know that part of my right. So I thought, when I got out, I thought, I'm the most irrational person on the planet. Why would I like that? And so if I had known what I know now, I'd be like, oh, whoa, let's go take that one apart.
I thought that story was powerful for 2 reasons. Some of us are the Janine in the room freaking out when we don't think it seems to make any sense, and we're trying to cope and we're trying to put on the face and deal with what's happening to us and look okay. But I also think about, what about everyone else sitting around the boardroom table? Did everyone just say, like, what's this crazy girl? What's up her, what's wrong with her today? And man, she's psychotic, right? And just think, just think negative things and say negative things. What if we understood that this crazy response was because of something that we didn't understand? How differently would we respond? So I think that's such a powerful example. It's such a strong visual, because I think many of us can relate to it on both sides. Sometimes we do crazy stuff and we need to figure it out, and other times we need to see crazy stuff and just be a little bit gentler and a little bit kinder.
I want to say, in this book I talk about the fact that a lot of times trauma survivors are the very best employees you're ever going to want. Okay, because they need validation, they want to work hard, they want to follow the rules, they want to do everything that they can that they're supposed to do. Okay, and I worked harder than, I can't even imagine how hard I worked for my employers, right? And then I go rogue. I just all of a sudden one day I just go rogue and go and do something so unpredictable. Right. And everybody's like, what happened? And so when you have, and a lot of times I was fired twice because of it. Like, I was their best employee. They said, you are the best. Your review, everything is amazing. But why did you do this? And so I think it's important for employers to understand.
Wow, that's great.
That when you have a great employee that is hardworking and wants to serve you and do everything, and they do something off the wall, that there's a story behind that.
And I think that is trauma informed.
Yeah.
I think that is what I say, if we could take away anything, to me, that's what it means to be trauma informed.
Yes. Because one college lost one of their best faculty members,
right?
And they had to hire 3 people to do the load I was doing, and that was so unnecessary. If they had been trauma informed and understood. Yeah.
Well, I want to go. We're going to hit one more question up, and then I'm going to give us both a chance for a final thought. Thanks everybody for for joining us and listening. Okay. I want to look at this question. Speaks about a person that they know, their daughter has done lots of therapy, but still has a lot of struggles. How much is too much?
So, how much is too much? I'm trying to interpret that question. Like, have they just, therapy isn't doing them any good anymore?
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. Like, is there a point where you're doing therapy and you're struggling and it's not working? We don't think she should give up. So, I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah. So I want to say that therapy requires the client to do work. I've seen some people that they show up for their session and they haven't done anything. They haven't done any processing during the week between their sessions, right? They haven't thought about it. They've walked away from it, and then they show up for their next session.
Yep.
And then they kind of repeat the same stuff again. Okay. So and a lot of times therapists will say, we're really not doing anything here.
Right.
We're not, because I processed every day I wasn't in therapy, and I was working a full-time job my first year that I was in therapy. And so but I know that I had like crazy, whatever, but I'm saying at some point you need to work. It's work. It is work to heal. So and it could be that the type of therapy isn't effective. It could be that you need, or it could be that there's not a good match between the therapist.
Yeah. So definitely don't give up, but look for another type, look for another person, and make sure you're doing the work. That's good.
Yeah, I want to say that I have a lot of people that because I help on pages on Facebook where people are going to therapists, and they're looking for support. And I have people say, yeah, I went to a therapist once and it was terrible, and I've never gone. And I'm like, oh my goodness, because that's like saying I went to go get my car fixed once, and I had a lousy, they didn't fix it, so I'm never fixing my car again. Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
just some encouragement to people today, like don't give up. So Janine, thank you for taking your time tonight. If you were able to kind of just put it together in a nutshell and just kind of speak to the person listening, something that you really want them to hear and know, what's your last word?
I would say that the life I have on this side of healing, I could have never dreamed was possible.
Awesome.
Yes. And so you can't imagine what, I mean, I thought I had a good life, but it doesn't even touch what I'm doing now. It really doesn't. And because I got rid of the shame and all of the things that were holding me back and keeping me from, I was born to write. I'm a writer. I'm an author. I was born to write, and I had not published a single book before therapy. Wow. And I have published 3 since. And that is the picture. Yes, that's the picture of what healing can do, is just set you free to be who you were born to be.
Awesome. Get rid of the shame. Get rid of the junk, embrace it, take it on, and see what's possible. It's possible. Thank you. And before I give my final word to everyone, I just want to call up, I'm going to show you the book so you can see one more time the book covers. And again, we're going to make sure in the comments you can see it's janine.org. When you go there, you'll get the links to her social. You'll get that incredible guide, the 5 steps that she talked about earlier. You're going to get amazing resources. You can join her newsletter. You can send her questions. She truly, as I told you, this was just a conversation that we wanted to share. She gave her time up. She is just being so open and vulnerable about her life and her journey. And like she said in Brave, she is brave. She lays it all out there. If you're in that journey, read that book and see what's possible. And thank you so much, Janine, for joining us and being willing. That's the other one, right?
This is the other one that I didn't even mention. Okay, so this one, if you want to understand the behavior of children, understand who are affected by trauma, this is the book. I wrote it really for teachers and parents of adopted and people who work with children who've had trauma in their lives, and it dives down underneath, and it talks about attachment, and it talks about, so this is Jeannie's book to help you understand children. Okay.
I'm thankful that you explained that, because I didn't know that about that book. And I know for sure we have parents, some that are part of our Oxnaz family, that are really trying to understand children going through trauma. And lots of people that are on tonight and were interested in this, they're looking at it not even from their own lens, but to be able to understand children around us. And that's part of who we want to be too as we grow. So thank you for being with us tonight. And I guess if I was to try to see what bubbles to the surface, I just want to encourage you that if you are in that place that she talked about, it's shame, if your body shows you and tells you that there's stuff that you need to kind of work through, there's no shame, and it's right and good to take the steps to go to therapy. If you've tried it, it doesn't work, find another one, like that last great question. But as we learn to become who we were made to be, and as we learn, I love this part, to have more grace for other people. Like you, every listener, I'm on a journey too. I would be maybe the first one to say, who's that crazy girl in the boardroom? Like, we have work to do, but I'm learning, and so can you. We can become more compassionate, less judgmental, and look at behaviors and not assume we know everything that's going on underneath the hood. But for us, let's, open the hood, do the tough work, do the deep work, as my coach used to tell me. And with others, how about we just be a lot more loving and kind? Thank you for listening tonight. Thank you for joining us, Janine. And God bless you all. Good night.
Thank you.